Yo pensé que te iba a ver el otro día. Allá.
Era muy elegante.
Estuvo muy bueno. Estuvo muy bueno.
Sí, fue bueno. Ahora se me contó. Sí, tuvimos pero bueno, ¿cómo estás, by the way? Bien, mejor. ¿Sí? Mejor que Jimena. Sí. Estuvo buenísima esa charla. No sé si con Jimena, pero no, todavía no he tenido oportunidad de verlo.
Lo más seguro es que hasta no te diga que no, conociéndolo.
No, eso hoy es martes, perdón.
Lo más seguro es que él me diga.
O sea, no, en realidad
Pero sí, pero hace.
claro. No, son los como este es el de panorama, puedo decir que todo claro, lo voy a repetir. Porque a veces bueno, dale. Vale.
Buen día nuevamente a quienes vi hoy. Quería hacer una consulta. Si alguno precisa dispositivo de traducción, que levante la mano, que se lo acercamos. Sin vergüenza alguna. Nos da mucho orgullo saber que no es necesario, pero sí, tenemos alguna. Perfecto. ¿Alguien más? Bien, gracias.
Como verán, estamos con algunos detalles técnicos, pero ya vamos a ver.
Vamos a perder cualquier lugar. Completamente. Es rescate total. Sí, eso. Ahí tenemos. Ahí va. Creo que la primera posición. El año diciembre tenía un match point también que era el cuñado.
Welcome. Good morning. My name is María Blanco Pey. I'm the Executive Director of the Alianza Cultural de Uruguay, Estados Unidos. I wish to thank National Geographic Learning, represented here today by Ms. Veronica Sanchez, for gracing our Professional Development Day with Mr. Aziz Abu Sarah, our keynote speaker. Thank you also, Nigeria, for permitting us to live stream this conference, thereby allowing colleagues and friends from around the world to join us. I am heartened by the presence of government, diplomatic, and religious leaders from our community who have joined us for this segment of our PDD. Among others, President Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores Interino, Embajador José Luis Cancela, Acting Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy, Carla Flaherty, Padre Julio Fernández Techera, President-elect of the Universidad Católica de Uruguay. Veronica was going to do the formal introduction of Aziz, but she's without a voice, so I will do this, and I'm honored to do this. Aziz Abu Sarah is a National Geographic explorer and cultural educator, as well as a TED Fellow. He is a co-founder of Mejdi Tours, a social enterprise focused on introducing multi-narrative cultural education and responsible business practices to the travel industry. The company aims to redefine the meaning of travel, and its clients include National Geographic, Notre Dame, and Boston University. Mejdi has been recognized by the UN World Tourism Organization, the UN Alliance of Civilizations, and BMW Group for its innovations in travel and education. In the past, Aziz also served as the executive director of the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University from 2009 to 2015. He was chairman of the joint Israeli-Palestinian organization, the Bereaved Families Forum, from 2006 to 2010. I'm nervous because it's such an honor for me to be here introducing Aziz, so excuse me if I mispronounce something. In the field, Aziz has pioneered and managed projects in conflict resolution and community relations in Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Washington, D.C., the Virgin Islands, among others. He is a co-director of the I Am Your Protector interfaith campaign. He is also a co-founder of Project Amal al-Salam, a grassroots relief organization for Syrian refugees in Turkey, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. In the media, Aziz has co-produced and hosted the National Geographic web series Conflict Zone, a series that explores the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the perspective of Palestinian refugees, the Israeli Defense Forces, Jewish settlers, and more. Aziz has also published articles in the New York Times, Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post, Al-Arabiya, and others. He frequently provides expert analysis for television news programs such as Al Jazeera, CNN, and Fox News. Aziz has been honored to receive numerous awards, including the Goldberg Prize for Peace in the Middle East from the Institute of International Education, the Silver Rose Award from the European Parliament, the Eisenhower Medallion from People to People International, and the Liav Sartawi Award for Middle Eastern Journalism from Search for Common Ground. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, recognized Aziz Abu Sarah's work during his speech at the 5th Global Forum of the UN Alliance of Civilizations in February 2013, and the UNAOC. I had to look up what that acronym meant. United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, and BMW Group awarded him the Intercultural Innovation Award in 2011. Aziz has been named one of the 500 most influential Muslims by the Royal Islamic Strategic Studies Center for 6 years running, from 2010 to 2015. On behalf of Alianza staff and board, I would like to say we are honored by Aziz's presence. He has demonstrated great courage to transcend an excruciating personal loss and lead a life that is an example of peace, and hope. I invite you to listen to his message with an open heart and an open mind.
Good morning.
Good morning.
A little loud. How about now? Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, well, good morning. I'm not normally a morning person, but because I'm still jet lagged since I came to South America from the Middle East, so it's evening for me, which means it's all good. I am a mix of things. I can't normally describe what I do because I'm an entrepreneur on one hand, I'm a peace builder, I'm an activist, and I work in academia and all over these things. But a few years ago, in 2010, end of 2010, I got an email. One of those emails, I don't know if you got them, which says, congratulations, you have won $1 million. Send me your email address and your phone number, and your social security number and credit card number, if possible. And we will send you $1 million right away. So I got one of those emails, but I read it a little differently. It said, congratulations, you have been selected to be a National Geographic Explorer. And you will receive this and this and this. And I thought, like most of you I think would, when you receive those kind of emails, what do? You put Ellie, right away. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. So a week later, I received the same email, and it goes, congratulations, have you received our last email? Yeah, right. You're really after me. You really want my money. I'm not gonna respond to this. So I delete it again. And then a few days later, I get a phone call and say, are you interested in being the National Geographic Explorer? And, oh, this was real. So since then, I've been a National Geographic Explorer. But one of the first things I did was call one of my good friends, and Scott Cooper. And we work together right now. And I said, we were working in university together. I said, guess what? National Geographic called me and they said, I'm a National Geographic Explorer from now on. And his response, why? Really makes you think about your friends a little bit. What do you mean why? He's like, you're an educator. Why would National Geographic ask an educator to be an explorer? What do you have to do with exploration? Exploration is about science. It's about, conservation. It's about discovery. It's about new things. What do? You know what? It made me think. Are educators explorers? Now, his response was, well, maybe you're exploring the faculty lounge. That's why they chose you. But the truth is, educators are at the forefront of exploration. Because what is exploration? Yeah, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, so get used to it. Talk back to me. Discovery, right. What else? Understanding. Challenges. How does that fit into education? It fits perfectly, because what do? You are opening the minds of the people you are working with. You are challenging them to look beyond what they already know. Education is all about discovery. It's all about finding something new. It's all about challenge after challenge after challenge and passing one after another. And so if you think about it, everyone here is an explorer. I didn't tell National Geographic this, but congratulations, you all have been nominated. This is what exploration is about. But this is not how I grew up. I didn't grow up looking for new things and discovery. I grew up in a conflict-torn place. It's called Jerusalem. Anybody heard about that town? This is pretty much how I grew up. I grew up in a conflict place. Everything around me was like this: destruction, houses being demolished, shootings. And when you grew up in that, you think that is actually the normal life. So for example, when you were 7 years old and you went to school, what was the most important thing for you to take with you?
I don't know, in my bag.
Your bag? What else? What is it? Yeah? Lunch pack. Okay. Nobody's taking homework with them? I had a dog ate the homework. So guess what did my mom make sure I have to take with? Any guesses? What do you think? Yeah, if you don't answer, I'm gonna call you. Just like in classroom. What do you think my mom would ask me to take with? Food? Yeah. But there's a specific thing related to conflict.
Something to protect yourself with.
Something to protect myself. What is it? Helmet? No. You guys have not seen it enough riots. Obviously, you need some help. You didn't know this, but I'm giving you a crash course on rioting. No, I'm joking. I had to take with me an onion every month. An onion. Why an onion? Tear gas, yes. Because if you have tear gas, you cut an onion, you put it close to your nose, and it should stop you from suffocating. That's what my mom told me. I don't know if that has been proven scientifically, but that's what I believed I had to do every morning. And so in my mind, every child everywhere in the world had every morning to take with them a fresh onion to school. And you have to check, make sure that your onion is fresh. Otherwise, it's a problem. Now, I was 7 years old. There was nothing really to do in my town. There was no community centers, no playgrounds, nothing. And so we'd play soccer in the street, football, as it should be called. But now I'm in the States, so everyone calls it soccer, and it's confusing me. But I would play football, and then one day, it was the beginning of the Palestinian uprising. It's called Intifada. And I watched television, and I saw people throwing rocks. And I thought, this is a good idea. Anybody here threw rocks at cars before? You're a good crowd. So I get with my friends, who are all 6 and 7, 8 years old. We get to the closest road and pick some rocks, start throwing, and we're very excited. What we didn't know, apparently, as a Palestinian, I was supposed to throw rocks at the other, which was the Israelis. I didn't know that. So who did we throw rocks against? Our neighbors. Which it didn't go well when they showed up at our family's house at night explaining what they did. They didn't think it was cute. But this is how you grow up in a conflict zone. Eventually you find out the right road and you throw rocks at a military car, and then what you don't know then is if you throw rocks at military cars, they actually shoot at you, which also is scary. And then you run away and you think, when you're a little kid, you really don't understand life and death. So you don't think the shootings is even going to do anything to you because you think you're invincible. You think nothing is going to really hurt you. This is me when I was good looking back in the days. I just saw a neighbor of mine a year ago, and just over a year ago, and she said, I haven't seen her in 20-some years, and she comes and she hugs me and she starts crying, and it's like, I remember you when you were cute. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Because what's better than hearing you don't look good anymore? It's the best thing. But I'm the youngest of 7. I'm what you call the oops child. My parents stopped having kids right after my other brother here, Taysir, was born. And decided that's it. And then, oops, something happened. I showed up, which meant I was the responsibility of my brother Taysir. He took care of me. He was the person in charge of my life. He took me to school every day. I normally don't mention this, but Veronica told me to. My sister was a teacher in my school. She's an English teacher. So I had my brother and my sister being in charge of my life. And you never want to go to school where your sister is the teacher because you can't misbehave. I was fortunate enough because my sister would take my kind of the parent role where she's like disciplining me, making sure I'm behaving. My brother, who was 16, 17 at those years, took always my positions. Like, no, he's right. The teachers are always wrong. So it's quite an interesting experience. But my life changed completely when I was 9 years old because a group of soldiers came into our house and arrested Taysir. He was 18 years old at that time. They arrested him on suspicion of throwing rocks at Israeli cars. He refused to confess. He was beaten up which resulted, he was sentenced for 1 year in prison. Because of the beating, he ended up having internal injuries. By the time he was released from prison, we took him to a hospital in Jerusalem, and they said he had to go through a surgery. And then after a few days of the surgery, the doctor came to my mom trying to explain to her the situation, and he couldn't find the right words to do it. And his way of explaining it was, "So do you have any more kids?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, it's good because you're gonna have one less very soon." And sure enough, a few days later, they see her pass away in the hospital. It's very hard when you're 10 years old and you see your brother being killed. It's very hard to deal with it. It's very hard to understand it. It's very hard to internalize it. As I say, Taysir was the closest person to me. He was more like a parent than a brother. And watching him being arrested, watching him being in prison, made me very angry. He didn't die out of natural causes. He died because somebody killed him. And when somebody kills your brother, you want them to pay the price. That's how I felt. You are angry. You are bitter. You are full of rage. And you feel that those people who killed my brother should pay the price. It almost feels like if I just walk down, I'm not going to ask you because you would act good in this one. He's got the color, he's a reverend, so, and you'll see why. If I walk down here and I punch you right in the face, what would you do?
Smile, no.
No, you wouldn't smile. That's what he was going to do. That's why he didn't, because he was going to say, well, Jesus said, if somebody hits you on one cheek, you give him the other. So I didn't ask him. I'm asking you. What most of us would do? Come on, if somebody punches you in the face,
Hit you back. Hit
punch back. How many of you here, if somebody punches you in the face, you say, wait a second, let me take a few steps backward and think about this logic. How many of you here do that?
Not
If
even
somebody
me.
hits you,
Not even me.
not even the reverend. Because we react, we don't even think about it. If you hurt me, the first thing I think about is protecting myself and hurting you. And so when somebody kills your brother, the first thing you think about is how can I make them feel that pain? How can I revenge? And you know, it's very interesting because at this point you start mixing up things. You start mixing up justice and revenge. It's a very thin line. You thinking you're going after justice, but in reality, a lot of us at that point, what we're going after is that feeling of I want you to pay for making me suffer. I want you to understand, I want you to see the pain. And that's what I did for the next 8 years. I became very active politically. I joined a political organization, a youth organization. I kept throwing rocks, mobilizing people to protest. I edited a youth magazine, wrote pamphlets, all the angry things you can imagine about why we are right, everybody else wrong, why we have to fight back. And this became my whole life. The only thing I pretty much cared about for the next 8 years was about how do I revenge. And I did that until I was 18 years old. In my high school, it was mandatory to learn Hebrew. So I went through 3 years not learning one word in Hebrew because I thought this is the language of the enemy and I would not even speak that language. I'm not willing to learn. And that was a problem because the moment you finish high school in Jerusalem, if you don't speak Hebrew, you can't get a job, you can't study, can't do anything. So I started looking at what am I going to do. And the best place to study Hebrew in Jerusalem is a place called Ulpan. Ulpan is if you're an Uruguayan Jew and want to move to Israel, you would go through an Ulpan. It's a special institute set up to teach you Hebrew quickly. It's an intensive Hebrew class. You go through a few months, you become hopefully fluent. And so I signed up for one of those classes. But there was a couple of problems in those classes. One, these are set up for mainly Jewish immigrants. So how many Palestinians were in that class? Only me. I was the only Palestinian sitting in a classroom where everybody in that classroom was not Palestinian, mostly were Jewish. We had a couple other internationals, but mostly Jewish students. And that was one of the most difficult things for me, because I actually went with an idea, I'm going to learn Hebrew, but I'm not going to talk to anybody. No conversations, not making any friends. Now you deal with language teaching, how well does that work? Right. I walk into the classroom and there's something different, because all my interactions with Israelis up until this point has been on a checkpoint, which, you know, some of the soldiers were nice, but you can't really have a conversation with somebody with a gun. You can't have a good conversation with somebody with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Settlers, we didn't get along. 200 meters away from my school, there was a Jewish school in Jews. Never met, never talked. The only interaction we had with each other is when we threw things at each other. That was it. And suddenly, I'm sitting in a classroom, nobody is with uniform, everybody looks normal, everyone is nice. And that started affecting my perception. And slowly, people started talking to me, and we would have conversations. In the beginning, obviously, we didn't even have anything we could talk about in the sense of language. We had terrible Hebrew. But we'll talk about things that are not, you know, deep. Things like coffee, important stuff, but not as deep. And, you know, my Israeli friends would say at this point, you know, the best coffee is instant coffee, Nescafe, which I completely disagree. It's the worst coffee on earth. But Israelis love it. And I would respond to them, no, it's not. The best coffee is Arabic coffee. Have anybody here tried Arabic coffee before? If you haven't yet tried coffee. It's the best coffee. It's heavy, it's thick, it's muddy, it'll wake you up for sure. And then they'll say, but you don't understand, Nescafe, the word Nes in Hebrew means miracle. And therefore, this is the miracle coffee. So I'm teaching you Hebrew now. Nes means miracle. And I would come back at them by saying, if this is the best miracles could be, I'm not impressed with this miracle at all. But we would start having conversations. And these kind of conversations break down barriers. Because up until this point, for 18 years of my life, we were completely isolated, segregated. We lived so close to each other, yet so far from each other. We did not know each other. We didn't understand anything. I had my experience, they would have had their experience, and suddenly we were sitting in a classroom, talking, understanding, laughing, yelling, arguing. Middle Eastern culture, we're loud, we argue even when we're friends. And we're talking to each other, and then I realized how separated we are. Not just by physical walls like this one, but we're separated more here in our minds and here in our hearts. We're separated by walls that are much higher than this one. This is a concrete wall. You can break this one much easier than the things in our hearts and our brains. Because those separations are built with ignorance, walls of fear, it's hatred, it's anger. Those are much higher to bring down. And suddenly when we were together, studying together, learning together, we were putting cracks in those walls. And this changed my life. I realized for the first time that regardless of what other people do to you, it's up to you to decide what to do. If somebody decides to kill my brother, all through these years that I was angry and I wanted revenge, I was living the decision that the person who killed my brother made for me. It was only when I decided to break away from that I was liberated. Making my own choices, regardless of what other people decide. And in a conflict zone, you always justify your actions, your anger, your hatred, by saying, I'm more moral than the other side. Well, they do this, but I would never do that. And then they say, yeah, but you do that, and we never do this. But if you do that, you live in a cycle of violence that is never ending. And suddenly, that classroom was able to break away from that. I want to talk about a few things of how to do that. how to break away from these cycles. And I believe you cannot really do it. You cannot revolutionize education. You cannot bring peace and conflict resolution to your classrooms unless you are willing of stepping out of your comfort zone. And you do that through 4 ways. Now, my teacher did it pretty well in that classroom. I talked about the students, but what I didn't mention to you is I had the most amazing Hebrew teacher that you could have. I walk into the classroom, I'm very uncomfortable, I feel I'm out of place, I don't want to be there. I'm sure you have students like this, right? And I'm sitting and I'm nervous, and it's my first interaction with everybody there. And she comes to me and greets me in Arabic, which I couldn't even understand, imagine what is happening. And she makes sure I'm feeling comfortable. Every day she does that. Not only that, she went out of her way to make sure that we're not learning Israeli culture only. Because when you learn a culture, when you learn a language, you're learning a culture as well. But what she did was interesting. She was not teaching us only Israeli culture. We learned some music and some things and how the Israeli culture functions. Sure, that was part of the textbook. But what she did beyond that, she said, you're learning a language to communicate with each other, not just to communicate with one group. And so we're going to learn about each other's culture. And me as a Palestinian, I'm the other, I'm the enemy. And yet she would come to me and say, can you bring some Arabic music? And maybe we can translate the songs together, and then we can play it in classroom and go through the words and go through the translation together. She was bringing my story and my narrative and my culture. And to me, that was revolutionary that she was doing that. And that's not easy. I studied in a couple other classes after. The other teachers did not do that. It was very clear to them. They dared to get us into one idea and one culture. You're studying Hebrew, therefore it's only the Israeli culture you are going to learn. And she did not do that. She would, we had students from Korea, from Germany, from the US, from Russia, and the class became all about learning about all these cultures, which made it so much more exciting. And there were a couple of times where she would say something and then she would say, oh, if somebody hears me saying this, I'll get in so much trouble. She brought topics into classrooms that are not typical, issues that people don't want to talk about in classrooms. But the way she did it was not into, here's what you should learn. Instead, let's have a conversation about this. It was more facilitation, giving us that chance to learn, asking us questions, making us think critically. There was a time of elections in Israel. She would have us go and ask people questions in the streets as a group and tell people, hi, we're learning Hebrew and we have a couple of questions. She brought so many topics from culture to religion to even politics into classroom, but in a way that wasn't about telling us what to believe, but more about becoming aware. So what are the ways that I'm talking about? The 4 ways. 1, you revolutionize education, stepping out of your comfort zone, you're learning about the other. As a Palestinian, I knew nothing about Israelis. 0. Because when you're in a conflict with somebody, you don't learn much about them. Because you're not supposed to sympathize with them, understand them. That would be a problem. And my Israeli friends who I met knew nothing about me, about my history. But we all so set in, we learn some things, but normally it's from our own perspective, which makes the other look different, look scary. And suddenly, I realized I had to change that. I had to learn who is the other. Well, one of the things I had to do, or I felt I had to do, is learn about the Holocaust. As a Palestinian, I knew nothing. And so one of the first things I did was go to the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem and go through that. It was the most amazing experience because I was terrified and I didn't want to be there. I felt like, what if anybody knows I'm a Palestinian? I didn't know any Palestinian who's ever been to that place at that point. And as you walk through, you have 2 emotions that go through your mind. The first one, you can't sympathize because they are the other. Otherwise, you weaken your own story, your own narrative. And then the other emotion is, this is crazy. I can't believe that human beings have done this to each other. I can't believe they went through that. And eventually, the first emotion just disappears. and you start learning empathy. You start learning to feel with the other. And after that, I wrote an article for a newspaper called Haaretz, which is an Israeli paper, and I wrote about this experience. I didn't write anything about my brother. I didn't write anything about the occupation. I didn't write anything about Palestinian suffering. All I did write about my experience, learning, and feeling with my Israeli neighbors. And the response was amazing. I started getting emails. Normally when you write any article, Israel, Palestine, somebody's going to tell you how horrible you are and you're evil, and you know, the comments section, you read those? Fantastic. It's like every article I've ever written, there's a list of like how horrible a human being, and regardless what the topic is, how made you even an expert? I can't believe a newspaper would allow you to write. But suddenly this article was different. People were writing stuff and sending me emails saying, I was moved that you are willing to learn about my history, my narrative, my story. What can I do to learn about yours? And it was powerful because all my life, I'm pushing my own narrative, my own story, and the only time where people became really interested in hearing my narrative is when I shut up and listened to theirs, when I was willing to learn. We set up a new project, a Jewish friend of mine and I, to do exactly that. We said, let's see how can we break the barriers and get people to learn about each other. And we realized information alone does not make people learn. It has to be emotional as well. What would make Muslims or Arabs more emotional about learning the Holocaust? We'll start searching for stories of Muslims who saved Jews at the Holocaust. And we found tons of these stories. Stories like Hadoud, who was an imam in Paris. And he would forge letters to the Jewish community there, saying they were Muslim, so they were not being taken by the Nazis. It's an amazing story, and we found dozens and dozens of these kind of stories. And then we started using those stories and making exhibits with them. We just had one in Geneva where school kids would go and learn about it. We had some in Pakistan. We had some in the States. And suddenly, when a Muslim is coming to learn about it, they're not only learning about the Holocaust, they're also learning about how their own community, some people from their own community responded. And they were like proud that, wow, one of us actually did this. Suddenly they connected to it. And then when the other side came, when Jews were coming, they were like, wait a second, so we weren't always enemies. They put their lives in danger for us. We found stories on the other side. This is Jacob Finzi. He's from Bosnia. When Muslims were being killed there, he opened his synagogue and hid Muslims in the synagogue. And we used this story, which makes the same thing. Oh, wait a second. Oh, so you're learning about the massacres that happened there, but you're also learning about people who made something different. And it makes you connect to them. You connect to history in a much more emotional way. So that's one, learning about that. The second thing in revolutionizing education is breaking stereotypes, challenging stereotypes. Anybody knows who Becky Williams is? She's a Nobel Peace Laureate from Northern Ireland. I was talking with her on a panel, and she's a fantastic person. She was telling this story. You know, Northern Ireland, the conflict is between not Israelis and Palestinians, it's between Catholics and Protestants. And kids were being segregated in their schools, like Catholic schools and Protestant schools. And so she was one of the first to say, let's make a school to bring kids together. And so she brought Catholic and Protestant kids together, and she realized they're not overcoming this idea, I'm Catholic, you are Protestant. So she thought, what could I do to really break that stereotype? Maybe I'll bring somebody who's totally different, not a Catholic, not a Protestant. She brought a Buddhist. We've never seen a Buddhist monk before. And the Buddhist monk comes in, talks about Buddhism, talks about life, talks about all these things, leaves. She talks to the kids after, and she says, so what do you think? How was it? And the kid's very happy. And one of them raises his hand saying, this was incredible. But is this Buddhist monk Catholic or Protestant? Stereotypes are a powerful thing. It is so hard to break through, but one of the main ways you can break those stereotypes is meeting somebody, is exposure. Exposure to stories, like we said earlier, but exposure to one another directly. This is one of my best friends. His name is Rami al-Hanam. Rami is Jewish. I'm Palestinian. Rami was a soldier. My brother was killed by an Israeli soldier. Rami's daughter was 14 years old when she was killed by a Palestinian suicide bomber. There are no two people I know who should hate each other more than the two of us. There are so many reasons to do that. But we don't. Not only that we don't, we care deeply about each other and we love each other. I've traveled with him, he's got me out of so many trouble, he's one of my mentors since I was in my early 20s. And Rami and I worked on a project in this organization, Bereaved Families Forum, where 600 families of people who were killed in the conflict, half Palestinian, half Israeli, came together and said, we are not doomed to live in conflict. We are not doomed to kill each other. We can put a stop to this. And so one of our projects was, let's go to high schools and talk to kids. We would go together, Rami and I, for example, to an Israeli high school, and at the beginning I would ask, so who here have met a Palestinian before? How many would raise their hand? None. And then I would say, so what do you think of a Palestinian? How many would raise their hand? Everybody. Everybody got an opinion. And most of them, let's say, were not that nice. And then we'd go to a Palestinian classroom and we'd ask the same question. It's exactly the same. The only exposure that Palestinian kids had were with soldiers. And suddenly they have an Israeli civilian sitting with them in a classroom and talking to them eye to eye, answering all their questions, all their anger, all their frustration. And suddenly within, the first 15 minutes are always wrong. They're angry, they're yelling at us, they're not happy with anything we're saying. An hour and a half later, they're saying, you changed my life, you confused me, you should become politicians and run for an office. An hour and a half. I just got a friend of mine sent me research, one from New York and one from Berkeley, which both explain that a small or short period of exposure to the other can break stereotypes. Say as little as 15 minutes face to face with younger crowd especially will break stereotypes. And the reason they justify it with that we have such a big social media life today that everyone's on computer all the time that actually face to face meetings are so much more powerful today than they used to be. It can change people's perception. So bringing people together, we would do, in this organization, we did all kinds of projects to do exactly that. For example, we went a group of Palestinians to donate blood to Israelis. And then we took some Israelis to donate blood to Palestinians. And that's when you figure out how powerful stereotypes are. The first response we got, what was it? Wait, so Arabs and Jews can give blood to each other? This was a legit, people asked that question, which is fine. We were able to counter those kind of things. You would not even think about it until you do it. And then when Rami was invited on television to speak about the event, and he was asked, how could you give blood to the people who killed your daughter? He said, it's better to give my blood to somebody who needs it than to split it in the ground for nothing. This breaks people's stereotypes. I was with Rami in the West Bank speaking to a group, and a young guy after comes to him, 16, 17 years old, and he says, I loved your talk, a Palestinian kid. I loved your talk, but I want to shake your hand. I don't think you would. And Rami asked him, why wouldn't I shake your hand? And the young man said, because my brother was a suicide bomber, and your daughter was killed by a suicide bomber. Rami said, well, you agree with us that violence is not the way? And the kid said, yes. And he gave him a hug. To me, those are the moments that define everything I do. Now, let me ask you this. I don't know much about Urban. So, ask yourself, and for you and for your students, who's the other in your own community? Where do the stereotypes need to be broken here? What are the stereotypes that need to be broken? And trust me, I've been to the most nice, cool, no-war zones in the world, and there's always somebody we see as the other. And we have to always work at our own prejudice and our own walls that we set in our hearts and minds. But you have to ask those questions to be able to answer them. The third thing I want to talk about, well, still in challenging stereotypes and exposure, you can do it not only through meetings, but also through experiences. I want to show you a video. There'll be no audio, so I'll just, we're going to put the audio right through the microphone. But this is, I went in 2014 to Brazil. Anybody can guess what? What was going on in Brazil in 2014? Yeah, there was a World Cup. And I'm a big, big fan since I was 6 years old. This is one of my favorite things to do is watch the World Cup. And I went there, and I claimed I'm going there for work, but really, I just wanted to go watch the World Cup. So I had to do an article, and I did a video for 2 minutes, which I'm going to show you now. And then the next 29 days, I just enjoyed my time. But one of the amazing things there was trying to think, how can things like sport bring people together? And in Brazil, I watched how people were learning about each other's culture. But I also thought, what if I bring Israeli and Palestinian kids to play soccer together? What would that mean? What kind of influence would that make? So let's watch it. It's a 2-minute video. I think it doesn't need language abilities. Anybody can play it. All you need is just a ball. And so everywhere in the world, people play soccer. My name is Aziz Al-Sar. I'm a cultural educator and a peacemaker. And I'm here in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I came here to watch the World Cup matches, but also to learn about this country and meet new people and make new friendships. Growing up, to me, soccer was as much part of my life as eating and drinking and going to school. I played soccer every day. I watched every match possible. It was something that took us out of the reality of the Middle East into a whole different world. In Israel and Palestine, I worked with Israeli and Palestinian kids, bringing them together to play together in the same team, not Israeli versus Palestinians, but actually mixing the teams together. So this is Yusuf. And the moment they got in the field, they forgot all differences. Language didn't matter, color didn't matter, what religion they are didn't matter. All mattered is whether you can play or not. Soccer is a great way of intercultural exchange because every team, whether they intended for it or not, are bringing some of their culture into the games. Their fans are bringing their colors, their music, their dances, and you get to learn about that. Even sometimes some of their beliefs. One cultural thing that people have learned in this World Cup is about the Muslim players who had to fast because of the month of Ramadan from sunrise to sunset, not eating and not drinking. And having to play while fasting is really hard. And so it's been a great experience and a great learning experience for everybody. Now, when we brought those Palestinian and Jewish kids together, we're gonna play some football together. Know what the first thing was? Sure. We're gonna play the Arabs versus the Jews and see who wins. No, that's the whole idea. We want to try to break from that. And in the beginning, a couple of kids said, I'm not playing. And so they sat down. They said, fine, we'll play without you. So we had the other kids break into mixed teams. And a couple of minutes in, they were like, oh, he plays good. Yeah, he's Palestinian. That doesn't matter. Oh, he's Jewish. Who cares? He's really good. I'll go play with this team. And suddenly they didn't care anymore because all they wanted is to be on the team where there are good players. Experiences like this make it different because it's not you're not only learning, you're really breaking the stereotype by being together, by being involved. There's a saying that goes, tell me, let me see if I remember. Tell me and I forget. teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And this is involvement. It's an activity, something that they live in, not just something they are being taught. Third thing, experiential education. When I was at George Mason University, I worked on a project where we took students, college students, conflict resolution students to conflict zones. And we would go to places like Northern Ireland, Israel and Palestine, wherever there is a conflict. And one of them is, we used to go to Syria before the conflict started, but after the conflict, we would go to Turkey or to Jordan. And there we would learn about what's happening in Syria by meeting refugees. And this is one of those trips. The first trip we did outside Syria. It was quite a difficult trip because I was just being introduced to the new reality. Meeting tons of refugees. 12 million people today are displaced from their homes. That's over half of the Syrian population. 12 million. Half of them are kids. Most of these don't go to school anymore. Many of them don't even remember a day where there was no conflict. This is one of them. His name is Ahmed. He's in a refugee camp in Jordan. When I visited that refugee camp, when I took this photo, there were 150,000 people living in this kind of environment. And I saw this kid and I wanted to talk to him, and he was walking from the tent and he's getting closer to me. He looked sad, and then suddenly he had this smile on his face, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then he goes down and he picks the object in his hand. Anybody can guess what that object is? What is it? Ice cream? No. Can. It's a can. It's a Pepsi can that's being crushed. But it changes your mind quite a bit because he was so happy to get that toy. To him, this was a toy. And then I talked to him and I said, "How long have you been here?" And he thought he was born there, even though his family has arrived there. It's about a year or so earlier. And you start talking to more kids and you say, "So why don't you go to school?" Well, there's either no schools, or there is no supplies, or there are not enough teachers, or there are so many reasons why. And that puts you in a place where you ask yourself a very important question. What do we do? How can you change that? You can either complain and say, "Well, I can't change the 12 million people's lives. I'm only one person." We're really not going to happen, and get depressed and do nothing. Well, one of my colleagues and I decided we're going to stay after the trip, and we're going to learn more about this. So we started visiting more places. We crossed into Syria, visited people there, and it was quite an amazing experience because we realized we cannot change 12 million people's lives. That's just not going to happen. We can get depressed about that. Or we can think about how many people can we help? What kind of change we can do? We'll go, okay, what if we call our friends and just say, "Look, we're going to set up this camp for education for kids, and anybody wants to volunteer?" And so we did that. And right away, a few months later, 4 or 5 months later, we had a few volunteers come with us, and 450 kids come to the camp. We had zero support from anybody. It was fully funded by everyone who attended the camp, meaning the volunteers. Simple, nothing fancy. We rented this background back plane of a restaurant that we used. It was crowded, it was not easy, and we were like 10 people dealing with 450 kids. You think 20, 30 kids in the classroom are a problem. Try kids who are traumatized. 450 of them. And then a few months later, we tried again. And this time, we got many more volunteers and many more students. We had 1,000 kids. And a few months later, again, still running this project. Fully taken care of by those volunteers who say, we can think about what we can do instead of what we can. And slowly, some of these volunteers, led by Nusha Kabawat, my colleague, she's running the organization now. going around saying, okay, there's 20 of us who are really dedicated to this. If each of us gives this much money, can we establish a school on our own? And so they've been establishing schools in all over Turkey, Jordan, Syria, completely run by individuals, has nothing to do with any big organization, with any big funding, because they care. And they started giving these kids a different kind of experience. Last year, I brought a couple of National Geographic photographers to one of these areas. And we gave cameras to the kids. And we taught them how to use those cameras. And we said, you know what, you saw earlier, when I took pictures of their lives, I had a very specific thing I wanted to show. What did I try to show you? Their faces and their fear, their feelings. Yeah, the joy they find in simple things. But I also wanted to show you how hard it is to be a refugee. I showed you the tents. I showed you the pain. So we gave them those cameras, and I thought it would be interesting if they tell their stories. Instead of me explaining it, what if they explain it this time? What do you think the pictures they took were about? Happy? Their friends? Family? It was amazing because it's totally not the stuff I took pictures of. Because for the first time, they're able to tell their own stories. And that changes the way you talk about things. That changes your narrative. You know, when people are traumatized, they can process their narrative in one of two ways. Research shows you either try to process it as a victim, we call it a narrative of besiegement. You see the whole world against you, you see yourself fully as a victim, and that's it. You continue to relive your trauma. Kids live through that everywhere in the world. You don't have to be a refugee to have that. The second one is to see yourself as a survivor. And you put yourself part of a bigger narrative, something grander, something more important. And you see your narrative as, I'm surviving. And that's what these kids did. I'm going to show you some of their photos. Most of these kids have not been to school for years, at least 2 to 3. Most of them have been living as refugees for the last few years of their life. They have never probably taken a photo in a camera. 3 or 4 days later, these are the photos I would take. Innovation at its best. I mean, this is, some of these photos made it into National Geographic magazine. And it made me think, why not mine? What they dream about, what they think about, obviously. You cannot do this without photo. I think this is my phone. Am I right? Is it?
No, it's mine.
It's yours. I only asked because I have a story. I'm supposed, oh, it's in my phone. It looked like my phone, and I was just sure the whole time it was going to be my phone. This is Anwar. She's 13 years old. Haven't been to school for 3 years. She was just starting to go to one of these schools that I mentioned to you that Nusha and volunteers we started put together. And she wrote this letter that I want to read for you. To whom it may concern, these words I read every day on my UNHCR asylum seeker certificate. I'm a Syrian child. The only thing I hope in the world is to wake up from this terrible nightmare and to return to my friends, to return to my life, to my home before this war. And if the time goes back, I just want to play with the people who lost their lives. And I will ask them to leave Syria. I never thought that I would live in a tent, but that's all right. I never thought that I would not listen to my English teacher, who I loved so much in Syria. That's all right. I never thought that I would not breathe the smells of Syrian fields in the summer night, but that's all right. But to whom it may concern, please stop war. And let me go back to my past life. You know the earlier photo you saw of a kid taking a picture with the mirror? That was her older brother who stopped going to school so he can fund his sister going to school. You see a pain in this letter, but you also see hope. And you can see the people who influenced her life. Who are the people who influenced her life in this letter?
Teachers.
Yes. Which teacher? Her math teacher? Not that math teachers are not important. Oh, it was her English teacher. It's amazing because when I read it, she stopped going to school when she was 10. This 3 years she hasn't used English, and then we meet with her, and she's able to use her English. She's trying to speak to us in English. She writes her story. And it's all because of her English teacher. Because somebody has invested not only in teaching her words, teaching her communication, teaching her how to tell her story. And I believe teaching her way more than that as well. Teaching her who she is and how to be as a person. That teacher had a lot of influence and impact on this girl. Out of everyone who's not her family and friends, she mentions only one person, her teacher, English teacher. I don't know about you, but when I was teaching, I always wondered, how much impact do I have on the people I'm working with? Do you have that sometimes? You're wondering, you know, I teach them for 1 year, 2 years. I used to take them to these conflict zones and like, well, 3 years later, do they even remember anything I taught them? Do they remember any of these experiences? And if there's one thing I hope from this talk, you can carry with you. Remember this story. And every time you have a doubt about your impact, remember this story. You have so much more influence. We have so much more influence than we can even imagine. The project is still going on. I think the last camp we did, I wasn't there, but I was in Lebanon just a month ago with, again, over 1,000 kids being there. Fourth one is learning to work together. Doing some activities together. We talked about soccer, about photography. I'm going a little bit beyond. A bit more entrepreneurship. A few years ago, I was frustrated with feeling my work was limited in its scale, and I wanted to think a little bit beyond. And so, another Jewish friend of mine, I mentioned to you earlier, Scott, we thought, what if we take our thoughts and our work and our conflict resolution things and make it into something more sustainable, something that can grow faster? Well, the only things that really becomes sustainable and grows faster is business, because everything else gets a limit. So a business can't push itself, it funds itself. But what kind of business? Well, I always love tourism, so let's go with tourism. Because tourism is one of the largest intercultural exchange on earth. Well, it is the largest. 1.2 billion people travel every year internationally. Not even within the country, internationally. 1.2 billion. You know how much that is? That's 1/7 of the world population. It's incredible. And I start thinking, wait, if we change the way people travel, that would be amazing. Because most people, when they travel, let's face it, it's not intercultural exchange. They get on a bus, they travel from one side to another in a very nice air-conditioned bus that locals even don't get on. And then they have their zoom camera, and they like sit like as far away from people, taking pictures of them. They're like, then put it on Facebook, see the indigenous people who live here, which they haven't taken a moment to even talk to them. This is how many people travel. I've seen the travel industry for quite a long time. I know when I was a kid, you saw my picture earlier, I was cute, so a lot of kids, a lot of tourists would come to me, and they'll get so close sometimes, and they go, and then walk away. And I hated it because I liked them taking my picture. That was fun. But I hated that they wouldn't stay for a minute to say hello, to talk to me. I wanted to learn English. I wanted to show them around. I wanted to do something. I wanted to have that experience, and they wouldn't stay. They just were in a hurry to take this picture and go see something else. We thought, let's do something a bit different. What if we make an experience, an authentic experience out of travel? Yeah, you see all the sights and you go to the beach. You should do that, fun. But let's do something more. Let's go have dinner with locals. This is my mom. I made her cook for some of my travelers. Also because this is the best meal on earth. You can tell, come on, it's called maqluba, which means upside down. It's chicken or lamb, it's rice, it's cauliflower, eggplant, and when you finish cooking it, you take it and you flip it upside down. That's why we call it upside down. And then you take it off, and that's what comes out. You're hungry now, right? I'm going for lunch after this, so I'm fine. But it's an incredible experience. And then we normally bring a band, an Israeli and Palestinian band, and have them play music together. And then everybody starts dancing. And then the next day we'll do, if it's a Friday night, do a Shabbat dinner with a Jewish band. And then we will do like amazing stuff. We decided, what if we start meeting more people? So when we go to the mosque, the Aqsa Mosque, we'll meet the imam there. We go to the synagogue, we'll meet the rabbi. We go to church, we meet the priest. And then when we go to, we meet some journalists, and we meet some artists, and we meet some, it depends what the group is interested in. But suddenly the trip becomes alive, where you leave after 10 days, or 1 week, or 3 days, whichever length it is, feeling like you know the place, feeling you're connected with the place. I'm in Buenos Aires for a couple of days, and I went out touring with one of the English teachers, and we had fun doing exactly that. We saw some kids playing football. I gave him the camera and said, I'm going to go play football for a bit. And it's incredible. I don't speak any Spanish, as some of you might have gathered earlier, and all I had to do was like, and suddenly they gave me the ball, and we started playing, and for the next 5-10 minutes, we just played football. And I'll tell you, kids this tall play way better than me. South America is not the place, apparently, to show off. if you mean. But it was incredible because we had an experience, and I'll remember that forever. It was one-on-one. We met some people, talked to some people, had conversations, and it's so easy to do if that's something you're focused on. And so we created this company to do that. But not only this, we decided, let's give more. What if, instead of having a tour guide for a trip, we have two, for fun. One Palestinian, one Israeli, co-leading trips together. People told us, oh, they're going to fight, it's going to be horrible, you don't understand what you're doing, this is going to be a miserable experience. The exact opposite happened. They disagree. They have some, well, you think this, I think that. But then it created a discussion. Instead of somebody yelling at the travelers, here's what you should believe, it became, well, here's one perspective, and here's a second. Then we went to Northern Ireland. We had a Catholic and Protestant. And then we went to Egypt. We had a Christian and a Muslim. And then some places you can't have always two together. But we started thinking, how can we make travel into an experience? What ended up happening is those people who were working together didn't know each other before. Everyone told us it would never work. Yet today, many of them are best friends, hanging out together outside the work time. We created a model where they're equal, they get paid the same, they know each other families, they hang out day and night, they know each other's opinions really well because that's all they talk about. And it created a change in the discourse of our music. If we can think a bit more like that, bringing people who normally wouldn't do things together, whether it's photography, or whether it's football, or whether it's business together, we can teach people to be open to this kind of activity, so this kind of work, where barriers don't really exist. Imagine the change that we can do in this world. If we can inspire people to travel a little bit differently, imagine the change that we can do. So what can I do? You might ask, okay, fine. How does that affect me? I think affects to all of us, and maybe not all of this, maybe it's a small portion. Think about it like this. There's an Israeli author called Amos who said a story. If you're walking by and you see a building on fire, you have three things you can do. First one, you'll run away. There's a building on fire. If I go in to help anybody, I'm going to get caught with this fire. So I'm going to run away as fast as I can, right? That's what many people do. Whether it's a problem in your own community or a problem in a different community, that's what many of us think first. If I get involved, it's going to burn me. The second option, which is even more common, you establish a committee to investigate who shall you blame for the fire. Who's wrong? Let's get on Facebook and talk about everybody who's wrong about this. But by the time you figure out who is wrong, which doesn't really even matter that much, everybody in that building will be there. The third option, you get a bucket, you fill it with water, and you throw it in the fire. But what if you don't have a bucket? You get a cup, you fill it with water, and you throw it in the fire. But what if you don't have a cup? You get a spoon, you fill it with water, and you throw it on the fire. Now, will one person with a spoon be able to put out the fire? No. But each one of us takes a moment and thinks, do I have a bucket? Do I have a cup? Do I have a spoon? What can I do? We can put out any fire. We can put out any challenge in all of them. Thank you. Sit down. Not embarrassing me. How about do we have a few minutes for some conversation? Happy to hear your comments, thoughts, anything you're angry about. You can yell at Veronica, she brought me here, it's her fault. No, anything really you want to ask, any thoughts, anything that relates to what you do, anything about the stuff I mentioned. There are many things, aspects of my work I didn't talk about, mainly because of time. But I'm happy to answer anything. No question is, every question is valid. And if you don't ask questions, I'll just come up with something to talk about.
Just one question.
Yes.
You mentioned a series of things that you're doing in Ireland, in the United States. I'm sorry, in the Middle East. And I was wondering, because I read in your resume that you were doing a lot of stuff in the United States. Can you show a little bit what you're doing there?
Well, we are working I worked on a couple of things. I worked on gangs issues in the US, and I worked on travel issues in the US. So the gangs issues, cruise issues were about what can you do to engage with young people who end up joining these groups, which from my understanding, often we focus so much on, well, they don't have an opportunity and we need to give an opportunity. And that's absolutely true, but it's not the only thing. I find there's a lot of similarities between gangs and terrorism. The reason people often end up joining has to do more with identity crisis, has to do with feeling that they don't belong in a community and they're looking to a community they can belong to. And gangs create that. So that's one area I've been working on. The other thing is the whole division today between conservatives and liberals. Being an outsider gives me a bit of a different perspective. I don't have the strong, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican as many of my colleagues and friends. So what we decided to do is run this trip in DC where people can come on it to learn about both perspectives, and it's led by two of them, one conservative and one liberal. And they bring in the 2 points of view through a discussion, whether it's about race, healthcare, religion, involvement in politics, the two parties, and then we have people they meet. People who are very conservative, people who are very liberal, religious leaders. And we want to change the way people have a conversation about the whole issue of conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat in the States. So this is one of my favorite projects. It's a new project, and I'm looking forward to getting going. Because civic discussion, being able to discuss ideas in a normal way is very important. I think we are slowly becoming more into the populist way of discussing things, and we isolating ourselves from people we disagree with. There's another research I just read, I don't remember with it right now, but it's saying if you surround yourself by people who only agree with you, you are more likely to become a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And many of us do. I mean, if you're on Facebook and you look at your friends on Facebook, most of your friends agree with you. You know, and it's amazing because I see it in some areas in the States where people are like, how could it be that so many people are willing to vote for this candidate? And the reason they think how could it be is not because there aren't many people who are willing to vote for that candidate, it's because we surrounded ourselves with those who only agree with it, that suddenly it's shocking us. But that's the reality. And if you open yourself and start talking to those who are different, you'll realize, like in every country, we have a lot of divisions, we have a lot of different views, and we have to start talking to each other to come closer instead of saying, well, I'm right, you're wrong, I will not even talk to you. Raja, any other thoughts? Yes.
So do you believe that it's always face-to-face? The talking has to be done face-to-face?
No, I don't believe it has to be done face-to-face. I think face-to-face is an amazing way to do it. I think always the best is to find the sustainable, scalable way. There were times we couldn't do face-to-face, and we used the internet quite a lot in those conversations, especially between Israelis and Palestinians. We would make partnerships between schools and set up a blog where students can talk to each other, but also teachers were part of supervision to make sure these conversations are safe and they were monitored. We used photography again, we used videos, we used stories. So it wasn't always face-to-face, but face-to-face is the most powerful.
Screens were facing your scene.
Right, that's absolutely true. Stories are if you can do face-to-face, tell stories. Jean-Paul Ledrak is one of the greatest conflict resolution experts. And he said, he worked a lot in South America, and he said when he worked in areas where he felt there was nothing to do, it's so hard, he stuck to one thing. Stories. We tell stories because nothing moves people like stories. So that's your second best. You have videos, you have things that you can connect people to. But it can't be, in my opinion, it can't be information alone, regardless of what you teach them. There always has to be something that reaches the heart as well. Does that mean no?
To bring it to a close, you're going to hate me for it, but we need to. And
I'll stay for a few maybe minutes after you come and talk to me. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
that's very
Can I
gracious.
take the question?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And then to South America. I would love to. I had so much fun here. If I get invited, yes, I'm here only for a day. Uruguay, so it's not really long. People are telling me about all the things I need to see. We went out sightseeing last night, but I'm hoping I'll be back and be able to spend more time. Yeah.
We'll just have to make it happen. It seems like it.
May I ask?
Yes, Stella, go ahead.
Do you have the feeling that this gap that is as wide as the river between Jewish people and Palestinian people will ever heal?
I think it will definitely. The question is, how long will it take? Every conflict will eventually come to an end. I mean, nobody thought that French and the Brits will ever have peace, and they have hundreds and hundreds of years of conflict, and nowadays you have a direct tunnel under the water that takes it from Paris to London. So we're huge. I think we have so much more in common than you can even imagine. Many Yuval, who you saw earlier, is one of my also closest friends. These are people I trust with my life without even question. So to me, I see that on a personal level, and I see it in here. So the question, do we do it now? Do we do it in 10 years, or do we do it in 100 years? We're letting a lot of news and a lot of politicians divide us. And I think the way to tackle that is through education, is through bringing people together, is through thinking, what is it that can make us unify instead of that divides us? People are afraid of each other, and that's the best way to divide any community, even their best friends. The moment you start thinking as them and us, it's a problem. The best way to break from that, start telling stories of those who will change your perception. I'll tell you one. My mother, for example, had a really hard time with all of this. Her son was killed. First time I started working with Israelis, she freaked out. In her mind, she didn't freak out because she was upset I'm talking to Israelis. She freaked out because she was sure they're trying to figure out a plot to kill him. She was convinced of that. I traveled to London in the middle of the conflict in 2000 to visit a Jewish friend of mine, staying in his house, and my dad lost his mind. He couldn't understand. So did the people at Israeli airport, because why would a Jewish person host you? But 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And I went to a doctor who was a family friend, Palestinian, his father was also killed by Israelis. And he said, okay, we need to find you the best doctor in Jerusalem. The best oncologist was Jewish. And when I waited outside the room, I didn't see anybody complaining about the doctor being Jewish or that. All they cared about was, is he good or not good? After my surgery, which went well, my mom said, until today, I've always prayed against them because of what they did to your brother. And from now on, I cannot do that anymore. Because while one of them killed your brother, one of them saved you. And I think that's how we change people, one by one. But it does matter. These are the stories that make people rethink their views.
I want to hug him, but I can't go with him. You made it personal. When we were talking earlier, I was telling Aziz that I had seen his T-cell talk, and he said, "Oh, but I bore you." And I said, "No, you won't, because the face-to-face does matter. It does make a difference, and you reach us on a very personal, human level. So thank you for honoring us with your talking, with your being so vulnerable and open to us. Thank you, National Geographic Learning, for making this possible. Thank you for assisting this morning to this talk. We are really, truly honored, and I wish that we had more instances, and we just have to make them happen. So thank you very much. I know, Veronica, you want to say something?
I'm missing my voice, but I don't want to leave before thanking Aziz, of course, for the awesome presentation, but Rosario, Victoria, and Maria, because they've been pushing to bring him here. So thank you so much for this great opportunity. Thank you, really. Thank you for everything. Thank you.